Talk. Welcome on this Blue Friday. We got the Arizona Cardinals coming off a tough loss to the Bengals. So, it's early. Grab a cup of coffee and, let's get rolling. So we do got to talk a little bit about this Bengals game. Obviously, it did not go quite the way we all thought it would. The red zone woes kind of continue for this Seattle team. It's tough to figure out how it is they're just not able to cap these drives off in the end zone. And really, that was the difference in the game. People will talk about, some decision-making by Geno and the interceptions that were a little bit uncharacteristic that he threw. But at the end of the day, if they punch those in instead of being field goals, that's a huge difference in this game. There's, also the fact that he got sacked 4 times. He was hit 13 times total. So when you're getting moved off your spot that many times during the game, because those aren't even hurries, those are ones where he actually got hit. So these are things that, obviously are going to make quarterbacks less accurate. He still had a relatively efficient day outside of those 2 interceptions. So did he miss a couple of guys late in the game? Sure, but he'd already been hit a lot of times. You can become a little bit gun shy when that happens. So for him to drop a game and have all this call for him to get, fired more or less and have Drew Lock be the starter, like, you guys need to calm down a little bit. Every quarterback has a bad game. Josh Allen started the year throwing 4 picks. Like, let's just reel it in a little bit. Obviously, I'm not saying Geno Smith is Josh Allen talent-wise, but, let's calm down. Let's calm down. Besides, Drew Lock is injured anyway, so he wouldn't even be a great viable option. That's why they brought back the guy in why am I mind blanking his name? They brought him back after this last week because Drew Lock was injured. So their third string quarterback, I don't know why I'm mind blanking his name offhand. They were below 50% on third down conversions. That obviously is something they have to clean up as well. So there's things from that game that are concerning moving forward. Obviously, offensive line play is a huge thing. The part that didn't make sense about what they started doing with the offensive line is, so Cross comes back, and then they kind of went back to just a normal offensive front, which it's still an offensive line that isn't quite right. Like, they would have been smart to keep some of those 2 and 3 tight end sets to help, create some blocking situations up front. Also help the running game a little bit because the running game didn't really get going. So there was a lot that wasn't put together well in this game. I thought it looked like they thought the offensive line was going to play better than they did. But because it wasn't, there really should have been an adjustment at halftime. They've been using that 13 personnel quite a bit over the last few weeks. So you would have thought that they would have brought that into this game just to, kind of help that offensive line out. Because, again, when it's Lucas and Cross, those tackles are legit, no problem. Like, they can lock those corners down. But now that it's been – Cross just comes back. He's still, not 100%. And again, the drop off is so big for those backup guys that they really needed some people in there just to help out. They also probably could have looked at, if they were doing a, like a 2 tight end set, do a split back, where you have Charbonnet and Walker on the field at the same time. Just, give that depleted offensive line a chance, as opposed to just running out the 5 guys and hoping for the best. Again, as we saw against the Bengals, it just meant that Geno was getting hit a lot. And even when he wasn't hit, he was moved off his spot quite a bit. Now, did he make some bad decisions with a clean pocket? Sure. But when you've been harassed all day, sometimes you start feeling pressure that isn't quite there just because you've been hit enough times. So I can't hate on him too much for that. The other thing that they really need to figure out is they've been giving up right around 75 yards a game in penalties this year. So that's something that also needs to get cleaned up. When you are giving up essentially a free trip down the field, because most drives start on the 25. So, I mean, you're essentially giving up 3 points in penalty yards every game. That is tough to overcome, and it hasn't really gotten better. It's basically been between 70 and 80-ish yards every single game. And man, it's frustrating to watch undisciplined football. Now, the number of penalties have changed kind of through each game. Some of them, I think the lowest one was 5, but there's been most of them are 7 to 9 penalties, which I'm comfortable with like 3 to 5, right? Because you're going to get that from time to time. You're going to get a holding call or whatever, right? Because there's holding on just about every play, so you're going to get nailed for that a couple of times. But when you are somewhere in that 7 to 10 plus range, that starts to scream undisciplined football. So I just don't love seeing a lot of penalties. But that's one of those where it's a coaching thing, but it's also a execution thing. So you can coach as much of it as you can, but the players still have to execute smart football. So, that's a work in progress, I'm sure. Like I said before, they struggled to get the run game going, but a lot of that was because you still have this kind of patchwork offensive line with so many injuries. And, going into this week, that obviously we'll break down a little bit later in the show, but, their projected 5 starters all were either limited or didn't practice during sections or all of this week. And so, you're going into this game against Arizona with a beat up offensive front. This is a must win. You are absolutely right. This defense or this better defense is coming. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of things they got to figure out, and most of it is along this offensive front. They're going to have to really go back into that 13 personnel, because if they are going against, to your point, a Dallas defense, a Browns defense, the Niners twice, of course, Philly, you're going against these defenses. The protection that he currently has is going to get Geno hurt. So then, at that point, these people that keep talking about Drew Lock coming in, he may have to, if they can't figure out how to get Lucas back in the mix. I still haven't seen any projected return date for him. I know he was not active this week and is projected not to be active next either. So there is a lot along that offensive front that is a little bit concerning moving into the hardest part of the schedule. Let's see. We got so red zone success is probably one of the biggest things that this team really needs to figure out how to do, is finish these drives off. They've been able to get close in some cases all the way down to inside the 5 and just can't seem to punch it in. So that is something that they're going to have to try and figure out. Not that I have a great answer for them. That is another one where it's execution. It's getting separation. It's getting the ball out on time. When it comes to running from inside, that's going to be tough. A lot of these scores would have to come through the air just because of how beat up this offensive line is. You're probably not going to get a great push that close in a goal line situation, just because all of your starters up front are beat up. So you're probably not going to get that launch off the ball that you should, especially when you look at guys that their injuries are lower leg injuries. So like Cross, he has a new ankle injury. The backup tackle, Jake Curran, he also has an ankle injury. So it's really tough to dig in and get a nice launch especially in a goal line stand, where your ankle and lower leg injuries are, all across that front. So if you're on a defense coming up against the Hawks, you kind of know that they have to throw in those situations. So, I mean, it's smart defense. But that being said, you have a guy in DK who is bigger than most people. You have very capable tight ends that you can get the ball out to. The biggest thing is they got to be able to create some separation, and that patchwork front end really needs to be able to provide some sort of protection so that he has enough time to get the ball out. I mean, he still needs to have a quick delivery, but at the end of the day, he definitely needs to be able to, have enough time to even see the guys or have them get open, right? I mean, there were a couple of them where he was getting hit almost by the time the ball got there. So, it's not a great look. The fact that they've been able to string together some wins is impressive. But, to the point earlier, there are some very good teams that are going to be on this schedule here in a couple of weeks. And, at that point, they're going to have some real answers along that offensive front. The good thing on defense, they were finally able to get off the field on third down, which is something that they had struggled to do throughout the season so far. So the defense is really starting to come together. The offense is what's starting to fall apart, and a lot of that is because of injuries, which they've had some of over the last couple of years. The other thing that was nice was not only were they able to get off the field on third down, but they were really able to lock up that running game. So this is the third game in a row they've been able to really close up the running game. Now, none of these teams have awesome running backs. So it's not like they shut down, premier backs or anything like that. This is probably one of the better backs that they've shut down. But that being said, not an upper echelon running back when it comes to the league. So we still don't really know if the middle is as tight as it's looked over the last couple of games, but it's encouraging. You're seeing a lot of penetration by the front seven of this defense. So one of the things that I've wanted to see throughout the course of the season has at least been going the right direction, and that is this defensive front really starting to gel and getting better overall. Again, like I said before the season started, this is not going to be an elite defense. Now the secondary can be, but the front seven was going to be middle of the road, and I think they're trending that direction, right? Like they're slowly getting to where they're not giving up crazy amounts of yards. They were able to hold Joe Burrow to pretty pedestrian numbers overall. So also get a turnover. He scored twice, but he had less than 200 yards passing. So, I mean, the defense is definitely doing its job across the board. And honestly, if this offense was able to punch just one of those drives in, this game has a very different feel, because that last drive, instead of falling apart, would have been, a field goal potential win. So that's probably one of the biggest things that they need to focus on, is just finishing drives, which, is something that this isn't the only year we've seen that happen. So it's a work in progress, we'll say. All right. Well, that's enough beating up on them for that Bengals game. It's unfortunate the way that it went, but there were plenty of things that were encouraging about it. So let's get into a couple of these questions that we had. Why haven't we brought in DJ Fluker with all the tackle injuries? Your guess is as good as mine. It wouldn't be a bad plan, especially because, he really turned his career around, right? Like, he dropped a ton of weight. And incidentally, a buddy of mine, Jacob Rice, he was the trainer that helped him do that. And if you need a trainer, he actually has a studio right on Mercer Island if you're here in the Seattle area. It's called Raise the Bar. Jacob Rice and I, we were on a national championship team together. We've known each other a long time. So great guy, been a personal trainer forever, as long as I've known him. And, I guess impromptu commercial for my buddy's place. But so, yeah, definitely check him out. If you need a personal trainer who absolutely knows what they're doing, check out JR there at Raise the Bar on Mercer Island. Awesome guy. And will absolutely get you in shape. And, in this case, helped save Fluker's career, right? Because he was kind of overweight when he ended up getting out of Seattle originally, lost some weight, went to Baltimore, and was able to, kind of resurrect his career. I know Fluker is still available, so can't really rule out the fact that they may go after him. It wouldn't be a bad idea considering how beat up this offensive line is, especially at the tackle position, being as we have one that's still out in Lucas. Cross has a new ankle injury. The backup to him has an ankle injury. So there's a definite need. So then it comes down to whether or not they can afford him. If he comes in for, a vet minimum or something like that, I do believe there's enough room in the cap for that type of situation, but he'd have to want to come back. So we'll see. But it wouldn't be a bad idea, and, that offensive line could definitely use the help. This one I got a lot. Is it time to move on from Geno? I mean, let's calm down, people. It was one game. He threw a couple of picks. I mean, you don't hear anybody saying, let's move on from, Allen after throwing 4, or, I mean, even Jared Goff, right? Like, he's going to have a couple of bad games. Like, it's just, there's going to be days where you're just not crisp. It just, it is what it is. What, you want to move on from Brock Purdy now because he finally lost a game? I mean, let's calm down. It's going to be okay. Right. With all the penalties, do they look to trade DK? So this is a conversation I've had, throughout the year. And honestly, even last year, we talked about it a little bit in the way that what they could get for DK. You could probably get a 1 and a 2 to the right team. You might get a couple of 1s just because he is a athletic freak, just absolute monster out there. But the thing is because he creates so many penalties, you have to gauge whether or not his production versus, the hindrance that he can cause. I made a case for it last year that they could probably move on from DK, especially, when you look at this season now, you still have Lockett, obviously, which is even though he's not listed as the number 1 guy, he's the number 1 guy. You have JSN, who could absolutely touch the ball more than he has. And, of course, you have Bobo, who has looked fantastic through, all of preseason, and then the work that he has gotten during the season. He's been great. So when you look at what DK brings, he's a huge target, obviously one of the fastest guys in the league. And, he's so frustrating to watch because he'll throw, he'll throw a defender on the ground after the whistle, get a 15-yard, drive killing unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Then he'll drop one that hits him square in the chest. And then he'll catch a crazy one-handed touchdown. And you're like, oh man, like, where is that all the time? So it's a little bit of inconsistent play that is probably where I struggle with DK. Because again, he's an athletic marvel without a doubt. But when you figure you're going to have one drive just absolutely nullified by DK, it's either going to be an unsportsmanlike, or it's going to be a weird drop, or an OPI, or something like that. There's a case to be made. There's a case to be made that you could move on and potentially be better off for it. Honestly, I just want him to figure out how to stop doing kind of dumb stuff after the whistle blows. Because, I mean, the refs will allow you to beat up on a defender, especially when you're blocking or whatever. Like, they'll let you do it. But when the whistle blows, you have to figure out how to stop. And you got to also figure out how to not listen to when they're chirping in your ear, because, that's where some of these end up getting called as well, because they'll be chirping at him and then he'll turn around and shove a guy. And if you've ever watched the NFL, it's always the second guy, right? So even if he were to have gotten pushed, as soon as you turn around and push back, that's laundry every time. So just he needs to become situationally smart. And, I guess that's where it's worrisome a little bit because he came out and, now it's being talked about in just on the NFL network, where he comes out and says, I'm not going to change the way I play. So the problem with that statement is now you're going to have refs that are going to start calling you just because they can. So they're going to start calling some of these things against DK even tighter. And one of the problems that he's already had is his penalty count has gone up every year since he started. So we'll actually go through this, because this is where you can really start to make a case that maybe moving on isn't a horrible idea. Okay, so in 2019, he had 2 accepted penalties for 30 yards, which means those are 15-yard variety. So those are probably unsportsmanlike. It's usually where you get a 15. But there were 3 that were declined. So he committed a penalty that, happened to be in a spot that didn't really help the defense at the time. So then you go into 2020, he had 3. So, again, we're going off of accepted, right? So he had 2 and then 3. 2021, he has 4 for 45 yards. He had 2 more that were declined that year. And then 2022, he had 7 for 80 yards. So now this is starting to become a little bit of an issue. So one of them was an offset also. So then if we go over total flags instead of which ones were actually accepted, you have DK getting 5 and 19, 3 and 20, 7 and 21, 8 and 22. And he already has 4 flags through 5 games in this season, which puts him on pace to have double-digit flags. So all of a sudden, it's not even that you are not changing who you are. You're doubling down on making bad decisions on the field. Now, if it's a hold or an OPI, fair enough. It's part of the game. Some of those will get called. Some of them won't. So, that's fine. But soon as it is taunting, unsportsmanlike conduct, like these are not only, the 15-yard drive killing variety, but that's just solidly on the player making bad decisions, right? Like if it's an OPI, that's a judgment call, right? That's on if the ref thinks that you fully extended your arm. Now, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. And sometimes they get called, sometimes they don't, right? It just depends on the ref crew. But those ones you don't feel so bad about. It's like, okay, you got to the top of your route. They're kind of grabbing at your arm. You extend, OPI. I can live with that. Or, like in the game against the Bengals, Lockett gets this crossing pattern. He wraps around to get to the far side. DK does a little bit of a hold, which honestly, if he didn't hold, Lockett gets tackled. So, realistically, he holds to try and, make that play happen and then hopes that he doesn't get caught. That's another one where, okay, I can live with that penalty. But when you look at a different spot in that game where the play was over and he just throws the corner to the ground, what are we doing? That's a 15-yarder all day. It doesn't help your team. It certainly doesn't help in field position. Almost inevitably kills the drive altogether. So those are the situations where it doesn't even appear like it can be coached out of him because it's gotten worse over time. So that is something that he has to be able to, in his own mind, be like, hey, I'm really hurting my team, right? Like instead of, you got to be less of an I guy when it comes to that. When you're making bad decisions, you're hurting your entire team. Those are the things where you got to try and figure it out. And so that's the end of it, where you can make the case where, maybe it is time to move on. On the other end, the athleticism, you want that guy on your team, right? You want that speed. You want that size. You want the target. So it's a really tough spot to try and move on from. But that's where the trade package, depending on what it is, was offered, might be worth it, especially if you could get 2 number ones. Or a 1 and a 2, especially if they have their ones this year and then maybe you go after Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Something like that. So, I mean, there's lots of ways you can look at this. But I mean, unless DK has a interest in fixing the mental mistakes, they're going to continue. And near as I can tell what the stats say, it's going to continue to get worse. So, I guess that was a long-winded way to say it wouldn't be the worst idea ever. Let's see. Do I think that B-Wag's being listed in the top 10, number 6, on the Fox list for best linebackers is right? So I actually like Wagner at number 6. That one made sense to me. Their list, if you haven't seen it, go to Fox Sports. They have a graphic on it. I believe it's on Twitter or X, or whatever they're calling it today. And so they actually have the full list of top 10. And there's a couple of them that I didn't love the placement on. Wagner at number 6 actually made a ton of sense to me. I don't mind that one at all. But if we go to this list here, let's see. Okay. So they had Fred Warner at 1. I like that. Roquan Smith at 2 is decent. But then now you're starting to get into subjective spots, right? So now you have Demario Davis, Matt Milano, Levante David, Bobby Wagner, CJ Mosley, Zaire Franklin, Dre Greenlaw, and Quincy Williams to round out the top 10. Now, I actually like this top 10 mostly, but I think Zaire Franklin and Quincy Williams probably should be higher on this list. Those guys have been playing really well and on teams where they've had to spend a lot of time on the field. So, not only do your numbers look good, but you're making those numbers look good over a significant amount of time because neither one of those offenses are winning the time of possession battles. So you're really emphasizing how well you're playing that position. So Zaire Franklin and Quincy Williams probably both should have been within the top 5. But I do like Bobby Wagner at 6. He is that central force to this Seattle defense. So, I mean, and of course, the fact that he's this far into his career and is still as dominant as ever, him at 6 makes all the sense in the world to me. So I like that. But some of the list, I would kind of move some players around. Let's see, with the bye week behind them, can the Hawks get healthy? Whew, man, that is a real question, isn't it? You'd like to think so. I don't know where they get their opportunity because the bulk of their injuries are on that offensive line. They do have some, linebackers that are nicked up, whatever, but the biggest kind of scariest part of this injury list is all along that offensive line. And unfortunately, after this week, the schedule does start to ramp up into harder defenses to play. And I mean, if you're getting beat up on defenses that don't have a great defensive front, as soon as you start running into a Dallas and the Niners and the Eagles, the Browns, like those defensive fronts really become a problem because if you are already hurt, those guys got real dudes on the other side of the ball. So can they get healthy? I hope so. That being said, they may have to entertain something like going out and getting a DJ Fluker or something like that, who is on the market, relatively healthy. And maybe you sit down one of these guys that, is a little more injured, that isn't moving off the ball quite as well. Maybe you pop them onto IR so that you have the roster space, something like that. Because, at the end of the day, once you get into some of these tougher defensive fronts, especially when you're running with backups and they're injured as well, it's going to be really tough to slow down the Myles Garretts and the, Aaron Donalds and, Bosa's. And I mean, these are dudes that go through good offensive lines. And if you're looking at a beat up second string row of guys, man, that's a tall ask. It not only is that a tall ask to keep, to block them up, but it's a tall ask to keep your quarterback healthy at all. So, we've seen what happens with a weak offensive line in this league. You have guys like, Daniel Jones, who had been getting absolutely obliterated by his offensive line and is now, injured. You got Anthony Richardson. They didn't have a great offensive line. He had to try and move around and do too much. He's done for the year. So Seattle definitely has to find something up front. Whether or not they can get healthy, I don't know that they get the opportunity. Week 5 bye week is really early. I don't typically like it. I thought it was going to produce a little bit healthier outcome than it did. They come out of the bye week. They still had 11 guys on that injury report. So unfortunately, it kind of didn't do what we were hoping it would do. And then their next they have a half bye week, a bye week light, so to speak, at the beginning of December, because they have 2 Thursday night games in a row. They have the Thanksgiving game, and then the following week, it's also a Thursday night game against Dallas. So then they'll have, roughly 10 days before their next game. So they kind of have a mini bye week there. Maybe they can get some guys healthy, but that is, a month away. So, over a month away. So it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence on them being able to get guys healthy unless they were able to make some moves and get some fresh legs in there to take some of these snaps to kind of help some of these guys get healthier. Because when you're looking at these, the practices throughout the week and the amount of guys that are either limited or not practicing at all, again, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence moving forward, especially as as the schedule gets tougher. Let's see. Should the Hawks have tried to get Frank Clark? Now, I believe Frank Clark is still available, but I believe Frank was trying to just get back to KC. I know he wanted out of the Broncos, which fair enough. That seems to be a little bit of a dumpster fire at this point. And by a little bit, I mean it is a raging inferno. But what do you do, right? So I think he's kind of set on making it back to KC. But could Frank Clark be useful to the Hawks? Of course. I mean, the guy is also an awesome talent. Would I like to see him there? I mean, yeah, sure, right? Like anytime you can get a top talent type guy on your roster, you want to do it. Now, I don't think they can afford him. I don't know what he wants, but I don't think they can afford him. He restructured his deal just so that he could get out of there. And, that's another one where it's like, fair enough. There's enough going wrong with the Broncos. I get why you'd want to try and leave. So should they get him? I mean, if they can, it would absolutely help. But I don't know how much they're really going to focus on that. Out of the two, I would rather see them go get Fluker than Clark, because that offensive line needs so much help. All right, so let's get into this Cards game, because this one is definitely a must-win type of situation. We don't really have to talk about the offensive line. I think we've kind of beat up on them enough today. But the fact that they're going into this with their 5 projected starters either not practicing all week or have had limited practice doesn't make you feel real good, because at the end of the day, this Arizona team is scrappy. They're going to come after you. They were not told in the locker room that they're supposed to tank. I know the media was talking about it a lot, but they apparently did not get that memo, because they have been really hanging with every team. And, they've come up short, but that's just because their roster isn't as good as other teams. But, I mean, they're playing some inspired football. They are not trying to lose. So I like what I'm seeing out of Arizona. This is going to be a tough game. It's a divisional game. So, those are always a rough go as well. Let's see. Lucas still doesn't have a projected return date. So, Obviously he's not available for this week. Cross has that injured ankle, and of course, Jake Curran also has an injured ankle. So they're really going to have to adjust that game plan from what it is they did against the Bengals to get Geno a little bit more protection, because this Arizona team will absolutely come after you. So if they can, they're going to have to do a lot more of that 2 and 3 tight end set. Some of those where maybe one of the tight ends is actually lined up as a halfback, just to, again, add some protection. Now, obviously, you can run some screens out of that formation. Like there's ways you can use that guy. He can, kind of do a chip block and fade out. That'll also make some of the linebackers not able to come in because they have to account for a tight end leaking out. But that's really kind of something they're going to have to focus on, because if they come out with the same game plan this week, that Arizona defense will definitely still come after you. Excuse me. Let's see. We got. They need a cleaner game. This is something I touched on earlier. Is they're averaging right around 75 yards a game in penalties, and that is something that is really frustrating to watch, because a lot of the time it's just a little bit undisciplined play. And I mean, that's where I really feel like their lack of ability to practice at full speed is hurting the NFL in general, as far as just the quality of the product on the field. Because you end up with a lot more things like false starts and holding, stuff like that, because I've made this comparison a ton of times, but the fact that they don't do any real live speed hits before the preseason, they don't do any real hitting in practice anymore. So some of these timing things are getting lost, which is why you're seeing offensive lines not be as good. I mean, it's not that these defensive players are just that much better. It's that they don't get to practice in real speed as a unit to get their timing and everything right. So you're seeing a lot more offensive holding. You're seeing a lot of false starts. You're seeing a lot of these mistakes that are some of them mental mistakes. Sure. Are some of them just, you're not getting the practice time that you used to? Honestly, I think a lot of it is attributed to that. Is they just don't get to practice the way they used to. And I get that, players don't want to practice as much. Nobody wants to get hurt in practice, all of that. And I get it. But some of these things are timing and repetition. And the only way to do that is to practice in real speed. So, I don't know that there's an answer to fix this, but at the end of the day, they do need to tighten up these penalties a little bit. They're one of the more penalized teams in the league. Obviously, not the most penalized team in the league, but they are getting penalized enough that it can stifle drives and create situations that don't need to be there. And of course, speaking of penalties, DK, hopefully his ribs are okay and he is ready to go. He is someone that would be kind of a bigger target in this particular game. You come into this, Josh Dobbs is, he's shown that he can make mistakes. So our offense should, in theory, get some extra opportunities in theory. And because Budda Baker's out, a guy like DK can absolutely tear the top off. So hopefully his ribs are okay and he is able to be a full go. If not, Bobo has looked really sharp. So I would feel fine if he was getting a lot of reps as well. But hopefully DK is ready to rock, because there is some weakness to this Arizona defense that I think his particular skill set could be useful for. So, and then, other than that, just going back to some of that 13 personnel, I think is probably going to be the right way to go in order to give Geno more time. So that's pretty much what I'm looking at for this Arizona game. Be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if you need a personal trainer, go check out JR there at Raise the Bar. And, for our normal advertising type of situation, if you haven't had your HVAC duct systems cleaned and you're here in the Northwest, be sure to check out Archer Ducts right there on Facebook. You can book your appointment. And other than that, get ready for the rest of your Friday and go Hawks.